Afternoon everyone, thank you so much for joining us in seminar room C. You've definitely picked the right option. This is going to be the best panel, I reckon. My name is Jessie Wild and I'm one of the directors of the Housing Festival, so working with Jez, who you've seen on the main stage so far today. And we today are going to be talking about a variety of different things, particularly looking at affordability, energy efficiency, and how that all comes together with social rent housing. Now, you'll have heard from Jez, particularly doing his introductions and the emceeing across the course of the day so far, about how the purpose of this summit is really about encouraging that uptick in the delivery of social rent homes that we so desperately need within this country. Particularly within England, we have a need for 90,000 new homes per year over the next 10 years, as we've been hearing, if not more. But the challenge of affordable homes is much broader than just getting housing onto the ground and people living in it. And in this session, we are going to particularly look at the energy side of that. Because when we talk about our housing crisis or the housing emergency or the systemic failure of this country when it comes to housing, we are also talking about the challenge of fuel poverty and what that presents us. So a household, just to give you some definitions of terms as I'm going to use them this afternoon, a household is in fuel poverty when they're on a lower income and are unable to heat their home for a reasonable cost in a way that's manageable for them. So over 3 million, around 13% of households in England would be considered living in fuel poverty, which is actually a huge number when you stop to think about it. 13% of households considered living in fuel poverty. The other side of this, when we start to talk about fuel and heating bills and all that kind of thing, is around powering and heating our buildings, which accounts for about 30% of the UK's total energy usage. Now, when we're looking at our ambitions to reach a net zero carbon by 2030 and all those kind of ambitions and goals, 30% of the UK's total energy use coming in from heating and powering our homes is making a massive impact, and we've got to start considering that and looking at that. We need to pay attention to this, and so often it gets sort of slightly tucked under the carpet in the broader concerns that we've got around the need for social housing. And so this session really is to start to unpick some of those interconnections between housing, between energy, between social rent housing and the question of viability, and really to debunk the idea that low carbon and energy efficient homes are unviable or unaffordable. I'm joined today by a fabulous panel, and I will let them introduce themselves because they'll do a much better job than I will, each in turn. But as they introduce themselves, panel, I'd like you to both introduce yourself, introduce your organisation, but also tell me why you're here. Tell us in the room why you're here, why are you on this panel, why do you care, and what is your organisation doing to try and address that imbalance? Now, that's a massive question, and I'm going to give you about 2 minutes each before we move on and into our full and frank discussion. So starting here, Emma, can you kick us off?
Yes, certainly. Thanks very much. My name is Emma Fletcher. I'm the Low Carbon Homes Director at Octopus Energy. Very Octopus, we don't have job descriptions, so low carbon homes can be anything from homeless units all the way up to big historic estates, castles, etc., because they're also homes. So we cover them literally the whole breadth. By way of background, I'm a rural surveyor by qualification, poor choice by me coming from Watford, and moved swiftly into housing and development, involved in the crest of the wave stuff that happened around Cambridge. I worked for Hill for 11 years on and off. I have worked in agri-tech, looking at climate change and resources. I have developed some big villages, 1,300 home type scale villages in my time, and then most recently in housing, I was working for 4 housing associations delivering more affordable homes quicker and better in Cambridge and Peterborough to time with the new mayoral authority. Not the day job, set up a community land trust 14 years ago, built 8 homes to my village, all on air source heat pumps even back then, and yes, they are still working. And then 8 years ago, decided to take the village off oil, so set up the first rural district heat network in the country, and that's what caught the attention of Greg Jackson at Octopus. So he brought me into Octopus 18 months ago. My job is to be somebody who was passionate about affordable housing, passionate about housing, but also a bit of a nerd and a personal passion with heating and engineering. engineering and energy. So that's really what I'm here to do, is be the translation between the energy market and the translator between the housing market and try and bring those two together.
Brilliant, thank you. Dr. Rehan Kodabakis, Operations and Technical Director at ZPods Limited. So we set the company back up in 2016 as a way of looking at how we could get zero carbon homes into the social housing sector as a way to really make impactful change. We were looking at doing a lot of, before then, looking at doing sort of a lot of legacy builds, single self-build homes, and we wanted to see if we could actually get the real benefits of zero carbon in terms of affordability, in terms of reducing fuel poverty into that social housing sector. And so we looked at doing things in different ways. We looked at MMC and we set upon a volumetric modular building company. We then looked at delivering sites in a different way, looking at market failure sites, looking at brownfield sites, flood zones, things that other people weren't looking at developing or didn't want to look at developing. And using that as a way of increasing affordability for land that has very little value, to use that to enhance the basis and the strength of the opinion to be able to deliver that to zero carbon homes and put more value in that area. My background is sustainable energy systems engineering, so come from a building physics background and looking at how we deliver social homes, but really now looking at how we answer that question. Because for me, if I was to rephrase the question, it's not can we afford to deliver zero carbon homes in the social housing sector, it's we can't not afford to deliver zero carbon homes in the social housing sector, and hopefully we can have a good discussion about what that actually means today.
Brilliant, thank you so much.
Hi everyone, my name is Emilia Alava. I'm a passive house architect at Sano. With Sano we've created many innovations around the housing sector. One of it is MDOC, which you'll see a sign outside. I'm not sure, I hope that some of you are familiar with it. So we've started this project in the look for the healthiest homes possible. And that's how we created MDOC and this system. And my job at Sano, one of many roles again that we have, is I'm a passive house designer and I'm in charge of the building science of it. So trying to achieve the best house possible in a way that we create that healthy home. Yeah.
My name is Rakaya Raslan. I'm a professor of built environment decarbonisation at UCL Institute for Environmental Design Engineering, where I'm also the research theme lead for energy, net zero and retrofit. And of course you might be asking, why am I talking about new homes if my area of work is retrofit? I think there's a lot to be learnt from the houses that we have, so that we can make our new homes more resilient. And also in terms of the opportunity to build new homes, the government has a target of 1.5 million homes. We can't afford to neglect the 29 million that we have whilst we're doing it. And I belong to a large research group within UCL where our priority is making homes, be they existing or future homes, healthy, comfortable and energy efficient.
Fabulous, thank you so much. So you can see that I'm joined by some absolute experts in this field, so we're going to have a good conversation this afternoon. I'd quite like to open up, so if at any point you have questions, raise your hand and I'll come to you. I am going to take Chair's prerogative and have the first question, but I won't wait for a Q&A, so if you have questions as we go through, raise your hand and I'll come to you once I've finished asking my question, basically. So I want to start with the panel. The whole session this afternoon really is about how are we going to make low carbon and energy efficient homes viable for social rent housing. So the premise is that social rent housing, it's not viable to do low carbon and social rent homes. And I'd like to take your views on this, but I'd like to caveat it. So part of my day job, while I'm one of the directors of the Housing Festival, I'm also seconded into a local authority over in the West of England. And I work with those that are part of a delivery team for delivering housing for social rent. We're looking at how you tackle the temporary accommodation crisis, but also widely we've got huge numbers of people on the housing waiting list. So in many respects I've been on the coalface of the struggle of both the financial constraints of a local authority and that need to house people that don't have homes or can't afford homes. And I've seen the challenge when it, you know, the real rubber hits the road challenge of the viability when it comes to delivering homes and having to cut the costs and needing to bring those prices down. I've got my own views on that, but I'm not on the panel. So can I please put this, how do we make it viable to deliver social rent housing, which has its own viability challenges already, and make them low carbon and energy efficient and energy, you know, affordable for the users that are in the housing? Rehan, can I come to you first, because I know that you have opinions on this, and then anyone else, please do chip in.
I think it's a lovely but very complex question.
Yes.
In terms of the fact that we really need to look at what is the value proposition. And we need to really start looking at not just a capital expenditure cost, but also the whole value chain position. And I think you, Amelia was saying, you know, looking at delivering healthy homes. Healthy homes means healthier people. Healthier people means less burden on the NHS. If you start bringing in all these different factors, you start internalising it all. And then where we've looked at it in MMC as well, is we can reduce our delivery time by 50%. Then there's a 50% reduction in the finance costs as well. So it's not just looking at that capital expenditure, it's picking all these little bits and all these other benefits and bringing them all together. And when I sort of look at, you know, in terms of coming forward not to do it, it's we're delivering homes that are going to people, you know, the homes are the springboard for people to get better employment, people that are spring for, you know, if we meet people's basic needs in the best way possible, we then again can readdress them in terms of, you know, reducing unemployment, looking at different aspects as well, looking at how we use localism, looking at how we bring additional value to an area. And we've done a lot of work on the social value spend. And that, you know, for every £1 spent on a zero carbon home could equate to 3.5 to 5 times that value in natural society. And again, phrase it as that value proposition, and I don't think you can argue it. And then other things that we're looking at is in terms of how do we justify that cost. If the land has no value, then we can spend a little bit more on the build. So do we need to look at and phrase the question about which land do we use to build first? How do we use that to develop more zero carbon homes through the industry? And then use that to then, you know, cross-pollinate the cost value and the value benefits and the economies of scale into the wider market and address the wider market after that. Lots of very different and important questions, but I'm not to monopolise the question because it's something I'm very passionate about. But also working with, you know, people like Emma and Octopus and getting that value proposition for things like the Zero Bills Homes concept that they have to drive that through the industry and show that, you know, that there are other ways to justify the costs of putting more value into a more capital expenditure into that home.
That's really helpful. Emma, can I come to you? How do you see the kind of connections being made to help unpick that challenge?
So it can seem really simple but very complicated. Our customer is quite often the housing association's customer. The housing association isn't always our customer. So we are very much purpose-driven, all about our customers. So you put yourself in the shoes of the tenant, and that's a different, sort of slightly different take on how you view the proposition. Number one, do we need so many house types out there that every single application is different? If you are in a bedsit and you're offered a 2-bedroom, 4-person house, does it matter if it has slightly different take on it to a different one from another one? You know, that is a question as an industry we should go ask ourselves. Because guess what? 2-bed, 4-person house is a good outcome for somebody. The next point is that if we are installing all of this technology, you either have to have a PhD, and a couple of you here have got PhDs, I don't, but you know what I mean, like you've either got to have a PhD and understand how it's used, or you've actually got to make it super simple for the people living it, and then you've got to pair it with the right tariff. If you don't understand the technology, if you can't control it, the likelihood is your bills are going to go through the roof, and therefore that is not fair on the tenant either. Similarly, also, if you are in a super duper EPC A home, is it fair that as a social tenant you're paying the same rent as somebody who's an EPC F with a bill that could be potentially twice as much as somebody is in an A? So there's a whole load of questions, and I know it's not an energy question, we can talk about zero bills, and I don't want this to all be about zero bills, but it's actually taking the viewpoint of the tenant. So we've designed our own heat pump with a super simple interface. That is now out in the market, the Cozy 6 and the Cozy 9. It has super simple lights. green, on, red, off, boost, press the octopus face. It's not difficult, right? And so if you've got language barriers and literacy issues, most people can operate those systems. They don't need to get the manual out. Has anybody ever tried to use a Mitsubishi air pump? Has anybody ever tried to do that? Oh my God, how complicated is that? I had to do it for a neighbour without a manual, really difficult. So it's keeping things simple. It's looking at the tenant's perspective, and I think realistically we've got to look at the cost. And then just a quick shout out to our Octopus Real Estate sister company. They have now got a fund for zero bills. It's long-term legacy, lower interest rates. They can afford to fund the zero bills proposition and work with local housing associations to then run and maintain them, which is excellent. They also can offer small SME developers 2% off a loan through Homes England if they're building an EPCA home, and 1.25% off. So if time is money, the cost of money also impacts as well. So. Yeah.
This is really fascinating, and I remind you, do put your hands up as you get questions that come to mind. But there's before we move on from this topic, I want to just kind of roll over it a little bit more, because there is something that needs to be unpicked slightly around who holds the purse strings, because there is a difference between where the value can be brought through and who owns the money that's going to pay for it. So part of the challenge that I see, and on a sort of very regular basis, is the person that's paying for a development isn't necessarily the person that's going to benefit from the lower bills, the lower carbon. In fact, they might have to pay more for somebody else's benefit in the long term. And this, I think, you see almost most beautifully with the public sector starting to kind of conflict within itself. In your example, Rehan, about the NHS. If you get better quality homes, lower bills, etc., you can start to measure and see how that kind of brings down NHS bills. But the people that are paying for the more expensive homes that have that is the local authority rather than the NHS. So overall, you get a better outcome for the public sector, but not necessarily better at that kind of point of cost. I see my first hand, which is brilliant. Thank you, Jake. I'll come to you in a second. Did you want to come back on that point at all before I bring Jake in?
Yeah, it goes again to the sort of the mindset of what the value actually delivering. Just because this part of local government is receiving the benefit of it, we need to still be appreciative of that on this part, which is delivering the homes. As a role as a designer and developer, we actually go through the REBA stages all the way to stage 7. We look at that post-occupancy and try and manage and deliver value after the home is occupied. And that needs to be a thinking as well into sort of local authority and social housing, is we care about the tenant going in, the tenant having lower bills means a better lifestyle, better disposable income, more springboard for them. And so that needs to be valued as well. And so it's that cross-thinking that, we're doing something that actually improves multiple different moving parts, I think is probably
it's very complex, yeah, absolutely. That's really helpful. Go on, Amelia.
I think we're using the wrong metric for it, so affordability, and then again, it doesn't always mean cheap or build cheap, right? So I think when we talk about affordability, we need to think of a bigger scope, also keep it in mind. All three. So let's say the landlord, they benefit as well because they have lower cost in maintenance. And now when you buy a house, also you don't think of that retrofit that's going to need to happen when you build lower quality homes. That retrofit is going to need to happen in 10 years, and that's also a big cost. And it's just time and cost. And then again, that health issue. So when I think everyone in the UK have had black mold issues. And that's also a public cost, so I think it's a long-term. The metric is wrong when we speak about affordable homes, isn't it?
It's a life cycle costing perspective.
Exactly.
So if you put in a really good quality triple glazed window that's a solid timber, aluminium clad, that's got a design life of 82 years, you're only maintaining that once. You're not maintaining it every 10 years like a cheap UPVC window. And that needs to be teased out and right at the beginning of those conversations.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And sorry.
Oh, go on. No, go on. Finish your sentence.
Oh, I was going to say that when you ask the question, how do we deliver these homes? Innovation is key in this, because I think it's really hard to get a recipe or an exact recipe to achieve, every house the same. There's always going to be small changes or small tweaks, but innovation needs to be part of a bigger picture where it's not just about these small tweaks. It needs to be about rethinking the whole delivery process and just keeping an open mind and delivering this. When we when we embrace this innovation at a bigger scope, let's say, I don't know, the financial or funding, when we embrace this, I think we are able to just design homes or deliver homes that are beneficial for the people that actually need these homes. I think.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Jake, please tell us who you are, tell the rest of the room who you are, and give us your question.
Jake Snell from Avery Housing Group. Let's just come into the sort of the zero bills or the higher performing homes and what mechanisms or experience you guys have got in terms of warm rents, or how do you offset that? So, Emma, you explained that, you know, it's not fair that somebody has a EPC A against the EPC F property. If you bring that up into a zero bill home and they're not paying any bills, what mechanisms do you have to offer like a warm rent to that housing association? Because we're sort of seeing restrictions on that from local authorities.
So, I mean, we spoke about this over coffee earlier, but a couple of local authorities are allowing the affordable rent to be flexed up from, say, 60% open market, if up to 80%, if the developer or the housing association is building better than building regs. So there is a little bit of flex in that market. The Housing Forum have done a very good paper on EPCs versus rents, which we think is excellent to assist. But obviously that isn't legislation. With my RICS hat on, chairing the professional group panel, we are looking at how do you value better EPCA homes, because yes, a housing association has to have a red book before you do anything. And okay, yes, it's your book value, but it enables you to borrow more at the end of the day. So those are the things. In terms of tariffs, we have got in our R&D platform, we're trialling with a housing association the ability to split the solar. It's not zero bills as we described. Shall I just explain? I'm really sorry. I'm not here to always talk about zero bills by Octopus. But very quickly, just quickly, if anybody needs to know, we can always fill you in. Solar on the roof, battery, air source heat pump, smart controlled by us, basically. The tenant just sets the thermostat on and off, heating and hot water, and we smart control the rest in order to provide zero bills, no standing charge, no need for a prepayment meter. That's zero bills. What we have worked out, and it's working with the housing association, we can split the solar. So we're looking at splitting the import into the house and then the export and the ability to flex the battery. And that has value. So we can reduce the reduced bill to the tenant, but then we can produce an income stream for the landlord. Now, I'm more than happy to take that off stream with anybody to talk about it further, but that's how we think we can start to generate some income. Now, the issue is that we don't like telling anybody they have to be our customer. It does involve us then having to talk to the tenant and saying, look, in order to do this, you have to become our customer. That's something we find quite a bit awkward. But we're willing to have those conversations. It might not suit everybody, but we're there to help. But even just if you've installed a heat pump and they go on the cosy tariff, we think you can save up to £300 versus your gas equivalent if you're on the right tariff. But the problem is that you've got to get housing officers up to speed. They've got enough trouble in their life. Do they really want to be doing this as well? But actually, if you get the tenant with the right kit on the right tariff, there are savings to be had across the board.
And we have lived-in data, which we're more than happy to share, to show that, you know, a standard two-bed, four-person home that could be using just under 3,000 kilowatt hours of electricity and 12,000 or 9,000 kilowatt hours of gas. We've got measured data showing a fully electric zero-carbon home. The combined energy consumption was less than 3,000 kilowatt hours. So we can already show that we've got that data, and that's with a social tenant going in, just with an eco meter, just monitoring what the consumption is in there. So not changing their lifestyle, not coming as a zero carbon tenant, not coming in as an eco warrior, but just living in that house as normal. So you can see that, you know, by simplifying it, simple controls, easy to use, that level of saving is already there. And it's just, you know, we require people like Emma to look at that, take
it's
that data.
It's seriously
and work
not
it out.
me. There are a lot of clever people.
I think this is a really interesting point, because it's the tie-ups between housing associations like yourself and the technology companies as well that is going to potentially make this possible on
and
much
local
broader scale.
authorities, etc.
Exactly.
Can I say one big issue though with social rented tenants is they don't always have a credit history to get Wi-Fi and broadband. And that is something that is an issue. Now, some housing associations, when they're doing new build, are installing broadband because they think that is a social leveller. They're getting some great deals out there to do it. We have also got a system for zero bills where we've built in effectively a dongle system into it to work with mobile technology. This stuff does rely on connectivity. For rural communities, this is problematic. If you can't get a smart meter work, this is problematic. So as an industry, there is still quite a long way to go as to how you get what I would call the urban norms out to those who either don't have the credit history to afford it or are living in a place where a smart meter doesn't work. And I think that's a big thing on us as an industry to sort
No, this is
out.
helpful. I'm gonna sort of slightly shift the conversation, and then I see your hand, Laura, so I'll come back to you in a second, but I'm going to slightly shift the conversation. Rokhaya, I'd like to bring you in at this point, because I think we've talked a lot about kind of existing, but also new build, and I know that you particularly have a kind of interest in the retrofit side of things. Where do you see the world of retrofit helping to decarbonise, but more importantly, how do we make it viable, again coming back to my original question, for social rent tenancies?
Okay, well, I'll start with the issue of viability in the social rent sector. If we kind of think back in terms of the history of public housing here in the UK, the social housing sector and public housing sector was the first where they were able to flex certain levers for sort of the space standards and health standards in housing. So I think they have a history of being actually sort of one of the most effective ways by which to raise standards in housing. And, you know, the new area we're looking at is energy efficiency, or the current area is energy efficiency and carbon. So if you look at the history, I have a lot of belief in the fact that the sector can kind of find the means and can within itself find the innovations to allow that to happen. So I have a lot of faith in the social housing sector. In terms of retrofit, so I came from a new build background and I was doing non-domestic stuff, but then I landed at UCL and that housing kind of came on my radar, and problems with existing housing kind of came onto my radar. As I mentioned before, we've got 29 million homes, about 20% of them are complexly decarbonized, so really, really difficult to retrofit. But they offer really valuable lessons in what not to do going forward. So how not to build in problems with these new houses that we're aiming to deliver. And how to kind of build in housing that is resilient to the future challenges, not just the challenges that are on our doorstep. So builds might be the main thing now, but will they be viable? Will people want to live in them? Will housing associations and social housing landlords be able to rent out these homes? Will they be too hot? Will no one want to live in them going forward? So it's not just about builds, it's a broader picture of that. And I think there's a lot to be learned from retrofit. It drives forward innovation, I think, because if you've got a big problem, someone has to come up with a big solution. Someone like Zana has to come up with a big solution to allow that to happen, and that can trickle down to the new build market, but in the wider market as a whole. So retrofit does have a very big role to play. But also on the social side, one of the issues with housing affordability, or not having affordable housing, or not enough housing that is labelled as being affordable, is the fact that we don't have enough existing housing for that. And there is a really big risk in the social housing sector with thinking about sort of how do we make them energy efficient. I had a chat with a big social housing provider in the north about what they were going to do with their least efficient homes, and they said, well, we'll have to sell them off because we can't afford to do anything about them. So, you know, are we building homes to kind of fill the gap that's been created by the lack of movement on the existing stock? I mean, that is a big issue, I think, going forward. And lastly, I'll just pick up on the issue of affordability versus value. I really like that angle, and we've been really trying to push policymakers in looking at the value of homes, not just the affordability of homes or the cost effectiveness of what you're doing to a home. And value brings in things like health, brings well-being, brings a whole bunch of social parameters that you have to consider. So we're pushing them to consider not just pound signs, but, you know, the value as a whole and what it means as an asset in the long term as well.
That's brilliant, thank you. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Yeah, Laura Broderick from the Building Centre. Rokhaya has actually started to answer my question, but earlier sessions we're discussing partnerships and the need for data, so I just wondered what more could be done between academic and industry partnerships just to sort of improve things and share learnings and best practice.
Anyone want to take that?
I've got one example.
Thanks, Emma. Yes.
Yeah, so we're working with the University of York on a project called Solar Sharing. And again, it's in our R&D lab at the moment, but we think there are people who are in this space that want to help those out that can't afford to, you know, effectively bring themselves out of fuel poverty. Now, we believe that, or the government figure I think is £417, which means, you know, it's the difference between being in fuel poverty and not in fuel poverty. So we've set up a system where you could share your excess solar, because what you haven't really seen you don't miss. So for homes that have got solar and batteries installed, once your home has consumed everything that you've had, actually you can then export to the grid. And it's not huge sums, and it's sort of, it's not like sort of charitable giving where you have to think about it, but you can just set up your house so that when it generates excess, once you've filled up your solar, once you've filled your boots on your house, you can donate into a pot. And we've been working with academics to look at that as to how we would nudge our customers to do that. It actually, there turns out there's a thing, you know, my brother used to be one of these guys in lycra and cycles. There's a word for it, isn't there? Like a, well, what's it called?
Mammal.
A mammal, yeah, okay, my brother was a mammal, but now apparently it's the zero carbon dad is the thing now, right? You know, there's these Phils and Steves out there that all love their solar and their battery, right? So we want to appeal to these people to effectively say, donate your excess solar and we can put this into our lab, and then we can literally go and identify households we can help out. So give us your excess, you've filled your boots with your house, you've done the rest, let's take that excess, let's then go and pass that on to homes and households that need that, and that's what we're on a mission to do. So that's something that came out of an academic idea. We took it on board, we thought, you know, we think we can work it. We've got a really responsive group of active customers, many called Phil and Steve, and then they've been trialling it out. And so I think that's really where you can take an academic idea and run it with somebody to see if it works or not.
And then hopefully someone like us, we can work with local authorities. So say we've done 25 properties, they've all got solar roofs, they're all generating excess back into the grid. So how do we link all those people together to share that information, to show that that can actually be donated to other people, maybe not within that housing stock, that's not benefiting from that level, and, you know, actually spread some of that benefit to those people in the EPCs and Ds that the EPCAs are actually getting as well, and get another way to sort of spread and generate that value from putting that money in here to spread it out there.
I'm enjoying this. Yes, tell us who you are and ask your question.
I am Rachel McCrory from Nottingham Trent University, and you have to excuse me because I have a really bad cold. But yes, just following up on the how can we liaise with academia. I think there's obviously lots of expertise on the technical side that can be built on, but I think often a lot of the questions that are actually acting as somewhat obstacles or challenges are around policy, governance, funding, planning, standardisation, and partnerships, to name but a few. And social science, I would advocate, also has a lot to contribute to this debate, so working with academics.
I totally agree. It's the Social Science Department of York that came to us. So again, taking a social problem and saying, what do you think you can do to address this?
Yeah.
Have you thought of? So we also have our own internal research team called the Centre for Net Zero. So whilst we don't sell data to our customers, we've got our own research team that can look at other things, and again, they're looking to work with academics. So find me and I can send you in the right direction.
And find me if you'd like
Brilliant. Any other questions at the moment? Yes, brilliant. Tell us who you are, ask your question.
Audley English. Talking about working with universities, the problem with fuel poverty is that after a while the house has damp and mould problems and the people are suffering. The NHS last year spent £11 billion for people with respiratory problems, and following AAB's law, which comes into force in October. So what we're doing with the universities, we're developing a platform that will will identify damp and mould within existing buildings. So the Ombudsman, he gets every 30 seconds they get a call about damp and mould, and they have to go and survey 600 properties a month. So what I'm saying is that for new build, it should be fabric first solution all the time. Get the fabric first right, and then your tenants will less be in fuel poverty. So my question is, are you addressing fabric first solution in your analysis or your building?
I mean, we create completely breathable wall build-ups, so we've actually developed a way that we don't need to put a VCL in there, so the walls can breathe, so you don't get interstitial condensation. The type of heat pump we use integrates the heat recovery ventilation system into it, because what we're finding, if you separate those systems out, there's ability for a tenant to, rightly or wrongly, think, oh, well, that ventilation system's using energy, I want to save energy, I'm going to turn it off. This, because it's integrated, you can't turn the MVHR off, so you're always getting the required ventilation rates within that, plus the breathable wall build-up, plus lots of lovely daylight coming in. You're addressing that fabric and using the right insulation materials, using stone wool insulation, not phylonic foam insulation or anything like that. We're making sure that all that breathability goes through there, so you create that healthy building, because the last thing you want is an unhealthy building. You want it to be as healthy as possible, because then you get those benefits as well. So we start at that fabric first, and we make sure the materials go in right. And when you look at it from that perspective as well, you also start addressing the embodied carbon, because you start looking at more natural building materials and reducing embodied carbon materials that you're building into the building as well. So there's knock-on benefits from that, and we make sure every material we use works twice as hard or 3 times as hard. If we use a stone wool insulation, it's a thermal insulation, but it's also a fire break product. It's also provides acoustic insulation as well. So one material we're doing 3 different things as well, but also to address one problem, but looking at multiple solutions by addressing it as well to make the money work harder.
That's really good, and actually moves me on slightly to a question I wanted to ask Amelia around particularly thinking through how we move this conversation forward and how we find innovative approaches to taking a step forward. I know you particularly have been thinking about MMC and how MMC can help answer this question around making social rent viable when it comes to energy affordable housing.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit more about some of the solutions you've been looking at, some of the hybrid models as well?
Yeah, so our model is, as you said, a hybrid solution, so it takes best of MMC and then traditional practices, whether we take those high complexity or higher risk elements and then by pre-manufacturing them in a controlled environment, we are providing just consistency, and then also we are giving the manufacturers just a consistency in their product, what they are producing essentially, and then by taking the higher volumes or lower risk outside of the factory, we are able to lower the costs as well. By building this on-site, we are split by taking this approach, we are able to do or increase the speed and then maintain that quality throughout the whole delivery of the homes.
That's really helpful, thank you. Any other questions in the room? I'll give you all a moment. Brilliant. Gentleman with your hand up, tell us who you are.
Great Places Housing Group. It seems to me that everybody's like energy efficient homes are everything we need and want, but it's the value proposition and actually translating that into a financial number that enables people to capture the funding and utilise it effectively. So in viability assessments, have you had any experience on the panel in ways that we can actually put a financial figure against those co-benefits? So the health, the tenancy sustainability, all those kinds of things. How do we actually turn that into a metric that's functional for those that are building houses in social homes?
Ben, is it? This is a crucial question, and one I'm so glad you asked. So, panel, who would like to go first?
The answer is yes. We've just developed our own model. We've worked with some external consultants to actually look at all these different metrics. The fact that you're bringing in reduced burden on the NHS brings in lots of things, use a lot of standard government metrics based on what sort of Homes England have done with some of their enact policies. And then that actually shows that for every £1 spent in developing a zero carbon home with us, could actually be doing 3.5 times, or so £1 can deliver £3.50's worth of social benefit on top of that. By quantifying that and wrapping it all in, we can then actually look at using as we were saying, some of the social sciences, some of the other elements, some of the political sciences, bringing it all together and developing it into a measurable metric to say that actually this is measurable, this is working, and we can prove that by doing this, it has got a greater benefit in terms of that spend.
I appreciate that, and the social benefit is reasonably evident to those that know what they're talking about in terms of better homes, but we still can't turn that social benefit into a metric that enables us to pay more capital for better homes. That's where the metrics against reducing reactive maintenance, having increased tenant sustainability, they're costs that we as an organisation see value in, but it's putting a financial sum or percentage to those to allow us to adjust our viability assessments.
Can I ask how you run them? Because my experience was through Panwin, and I know other appraisal systems are available. Me on the land side, I was only allowed to tinker with the left-hand side of Panwin. The right-hand side of Panwin was locked in at the beginning of the year to ensure that all of our developments covered all the central services and all their costs. That's somewhere I think does need addressing, but that, in my experience of working on it, was due to people within the organisation taking a really hard look and reflection about actually, if it's a heat pump scheme versus a gas scheme and they don't need to send anybody in every year, could you reduce that central services cost down? But I couldn't, as the land person, ever touch that bit. It was set at the beginning of the year, it was agreed by committee, and effectively it was also covering a head count of a team doing maintenance. You couldn't actually flex the appraisal even though the proposition was better. So I would put it on also a little bit back on the housing associations to flex the modelling to reflect the better developments.
And I think this is crucial. So from a local authority perspective, putting on my local authority hat, that's one of the big questions we've had to challenge into the local authority where we work and up the chain, essentially, because as Emma said, those kind of appraisal models are set. We're looking at our budgets, we're looking at how much it costs at the moment we spend it, and we're not looking at the kind of life cycle costs. But actually we had a great constructive debate, I would call it, with some of our financial directors at the time to actually look at, right, but what is the model and how do we move this forward so that actually over the long period of time we've got a better financial model where we can actually be building things which it makes sense, we can build things that will last as long as and cost us less over the long term. But that was a robust debate. It wasn't an easily won argument, but it was one absolutely, Emma, as you said, needed to be won kind of internally before we could start pushing to find the right ways, because we needed to find somebody internally who's willing to even hear that conversation and then start that debate around which metrics are you going to take forward. And we ended up with a very simple model, not to do with energy but more to do with the cost of moving people out of temporary accommodation into social rent housing. But it was a very simple metric of, well, it's going to cost you more here, so if we do it here, it costs you less. It doesn't answer the energy question, but it's a similar thing I think we've got to wrestle with.
I think you've spoken at that point about the data that you're collecting on the homes you've delivered. So there is data out there that tells us how much maintenance has had to be carried out to these properties based on the high performance spec being delivered, what the cost to run has been for customers. You probably also could share tenant data in terms of turnover of tenants and if there've been late payments or anything like that with providers that you're working with. And that starts to introduce a degree of trust in that what we kind of think we know is true. It starts to make it actually true, and then those conversations around adjusting or introducing
much easier to have, aren't they?
so much easier. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm very aware that we are running very, very rapidly out of time. So, panel, I'm going to come to you in a moment for your 30-second takeaway before we close the session. But before I come for you, I'm giving you a little bit of time to think. I'm stalling for you. I just want to say a massive thank you to the panel. I want to say a massive thank you to you as well for the interesting questions that we've got going on. This is a really important part of the conversation, and often one that is slightly kind of sidelined. It's sort of put in the it'll sort itself out, or the too difficult category. So I'm glad that you've been here, we've been able to have this conversation. So Emma, can I come to you for your 30-second takeaway?
Yeah, come to us with your problems. We're more than just an energy company. We've got some really clever people that want to solve these problems and passionately care. So come to us soon and let's just see if we can solve these things together.
Yeah, so to echo that, there's a lot of conversations around the need for data, need for information. If someone's got a specific way they want to present something or need something presented, we've got data now. We set the company up back in 2016. We started delivering our first housing back in 2018. So we've got buildings that have been in existence for a decent period of time that we can go, and we've got access to that data. So I like the questions that are coming, and we want to move it into almost into that sort of sociology field that we want people to demand. They want zero carbon homes. This is what they want to be living in, and we can prove that it works in the social housing field. So yeah, what do you need? Let us know, we'll work with you.
Amelia.
Yeah, well, similar to that, MDOC, the system that I mentioned, is more about than just a construction or hybrid construction system. It's more about collaboration. So bringing people together into delivering this healthy homes and just effectively the best homes we can hope for. Yeah.
And I think just listening to my fellow panellists and the questions today, I think central to this is reimagining what value is, imagining what our homes mean to us beyond sort of the pound signs. And in terms of from an organisational perspective, I work in academia, everything is possible. We love data, we love people, we love doing things, and we're genuinely interested in hearing people's problems, because we don't kind of sit in a tower and kind of see everything. We're here to solve real problems, and your experiences, your questions are what keeps us going in terms of our work.
Thank you so much. The thing that's really impressed me about this panel, and it's a privilege to actually be able to host this conversation, is that there feels like there's real momentum here. We're not just talking about things in theory, but we're talking about real life examples, and I feel like I'm coming away at least with a bit more hope than I had coming into this panel, that this is possible and there are solutions from here that we can start to really roll out. So can I have a massive round of applause for the panel?